I'm delighted to introduce two outsiders. A young man who looks very snazzy in his suit, like Ross always does, because his parents were tailors, two immigrant Mexican tailors who came to America to seek the American dream, live the American dream. Their son has grown up to be a major influence on bringing tax cuts to America and bringing the dream of small businesses to life. He's the CEO of the Job Creators Network in America, which travels around the states, argues for lower taxes, helps small businesses and what we would here call tradies. I'm delighted to introduce to outsiders Alfredo Ortiz. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me on the show.
So talk us through, Alfredo, the idea of the Job Creators Network and what you do, and then talk us through the Donald Trump tax.
Absolutely. Well, I couldn't be more honored, frankly, to lead an organization like Job Creators Network. There are about 30 million small business owners, I guess you call them tradies, in the United States that employ about 60 million hardworking Americans. So we're talking 90 million hardworking Americans, right, really, that are dependent on the success of small business. Under the previous administration, under Barack Obama, they were being decimated. The optimism was really at the floor. And in fact, one of the scary statistics which really got us going in terms of what we had to do was what I called negative entrepreneurialism. More businesses were closing in the United States than were opening. It was the first time in history that was happening. And why was it? There were three reasons. It was over-regulation, just too much red tape. There was taxation was way too high, over 50 cents of every dollar going back to the government of these hardworking individuals. And then also lack of access to capital and credit. Primarily driven by Dodd-Frank, as you remember, that particular legislation really led to the closing of over 2,000 community banks in the United States, mostly in rural areas, which really impacted our small business owners tremendously. So we knew we had to do something and do something quickly.
What was the idea of Dodd-Frank? Just explain it to our audience.
So the idea of Dodd-Frank was really in reaction to the financial meltdown, which is to really basically add more compliance cost for banks, right? And which is fine for a large bank because they have the wherewithal to do that. But when you have that same compliance cost trying to be spread over a small business, a small bank, a community bank, it's impossible. So again, 2,000 community banks being driven out of business really impacted what was called character loans in many cases, where people just knew the community leaders. And we got to remember, these small businesses, these tradies, we call it, they were really part of the community, the backbone of our country. In fact, 2/3 of new job growth in the United States is driven by these small business owners.
So you took to a bus. You had we've got some pictures we'll probably put up of the Job Creators Network.
Right.
Tell us about the Job Creators Network and the bus trips around the states and what that's achieved. And and how you've tried to replicate it here recently.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we quickly learned was that the media was not necessarily friendly to this message in terms of talking about small business owners and the importance of small business owners.
Because the media loves regulation. That's sort of like, Dad, more forms. Give us more forms.
Well, you know what? It seems as though, quite frankly, that the Democrats in the United States, I guess you call them more like the Labor Party. I asked a very, very smart man out in D.C. who runs one of the top think tanks, why is that they don't support small business? I mean, you would think that they would, right? I mean, it's all...
Same problem here.
Right, in the United States, if you look at the composition of small businesses, they're Asians, blacks, Hispanic, women, you would think that's their base, right? Why not support it? And he had said something which just kind of, the light bulb went off, which is because they can't corral small business like they can large business, right? If you have 2 or 3 large businesses, large banks or large energy, let's say, it's easy to control them. It's easy to regulate them, right? When you've got millions of small business owners that are starting to succeed, how do you corral that?
Well, this is what we find in the architecture of the trade union movement in Australia. If you look at the industries that the trade union movement is drawn to, they're drawn to the ones that are not where there is the greatest risk of safety concerns, or indeed where there is the greatest vulnerability of the worker in the worker's relation with the boss. They're attracted to industries where people are easiest to organise.
That's correct.
So we find the greatest representation of trade unions is in public servants, right? Because they're all in the same building. Or then you find in big construction companies, because they can organise them all inside one site. We love... But if you want to try and get, for example, look after taxi drivers or Uber drivers, the union's got no interest whatsoever whatsoever,
right.
because it requires effort to organise.
Right. And I think it was that spirit of entrepreneurialism that was really disappearing. So about 3 years ago, we did that survey amongst national small business owners, and we asked that question, what is keeping you behind? And it really was those three elements of over-regulation, right, too much red tape, over-taxation, and the lack of access to capital and credit. And so we went on this bus tour. Our first bus tour was actually named the Bring Small Businesses Back bus tour, because that's what we needed to do. They were declining, so we had to bring them back. And it was really focused on those three elements, those three pillars. And then last year was really, we hit the taxation part, because that was one of the primary things that we saw was important, that was really hurting them. And so we went out and really pushed for lower taxes, not only for small and medium businesses, but also all businesses in general, because I actually used to own a small business myself, and one thing I quickly realized is my number 1, 2, and 3 customers were big businesses. When big businesses did well, I did well. When they did poorly, I did poorly. I mean, a lot of us remember during the meltdown, the financial crisis, or you may have heard about it, that Christmas party was shut down because people couldn't afford it anymore. These large companies couldn't afford it anymore. It wasn't only about, that didn't only lead to like sad employees because there's no more Christmas parties, right? It led to that deli guy down the street, think about that, who couldn't cater anything anymore. And guess what? He would order from the bread guy, from the meat guy, from the water guy, right? So it was a ripple effect in a negative way. So now with what President Trump has done, especially on regulations and taxation, it's been a very positive.
Let's talk through Trump, because, okay, so you're here, the independent... the IPA have brought you out, Institute of Public Affairs, and they brought you out here to Australia to sell the message of lower taxes, because that's a big political kind of hot potato here, and we absolutely concur with your point of view, particularly tradies, particularly small business people, outsiders everywhere want to see lower taxes for the reasons you've said. You've gone all the way from your parents' tailor shop, the kid, to the White House. You've sat in meetings with Donald Trump talking about tax. Tell us, firstly, Donald Trump's successes and achievements, and also what's he like to do?
Right. Well, first of all, I got to say it's completely surreal. I mean, the fact that I'm sitting here with both of you in Australia talking about taxes and the work that we did with the White House, with the administration, it's surreal. So I realize how blessed I am really from that perspective. But we all have a purpose sometimes, right? And sometimes I think we also have to make ourselves uncomfortable, right, to do the right things. I mean, trust me, I'm not exactly comfortable sitting here, right, talking about it, but we need to talk about it. Right, and we need to get more people that are out there in front. The one thing that President Trump does so well is that he doesn't really honestly care what people think of him. And that's the bottom line. He knows what he has to do. He's a great CEO when you think about that. More than a president, I see him as the CEO of the United States. A lot of people say, oh my God, I can't believe all this tariffs, and why did he do this? He's ruining our country. I'm a free trader, just so you understand. But I understand why he's doing what he's doing. He's using tariffs to lead to free trade.
Tariffs,
right? When you look at what's happened, for example, with the EU, when you look at Mexico blowing up the NAFTA agreement.
He's just announced a major new deal with Mexico.
That's absolutely, what a great squeeze play, too, on the Canadians. I mean, they're going to have to come to the table, because there's one thing, and it's in the art of the deal that President Trump understands, right, is leverage, the power of leverage.
When anybody mentions the Bible, we have
the soundtrack.
But it's so true, right? I mean, people are sitting there, what is he doing? Why is he doing that? Well, just read the darn book. I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's right there, but he knows the power of leverage. And one thing he knows and understands is that the power of the United States is the largest consumption economy in the world. And I'm sorry, I hope it doesn't come out wrong, but everybody needs the United States more than they need them, because they need them as a trading partner.
That's absolutely
correct.
And
so fundamentally, he's using that. He's leveraging that, and he's using that to advantage. And I frankly love what he did, for example, with the EU. It was a two-finger to China when they said, well, we're going to go ahead and slap some tariffs on to your soybean market and really hurt your farmers. What did he do? He negotiated a deal with the EU on tariffs and stuff like that and dropping them down to zero. He goes, oh, and by the way, I need you to buy soybeans. right? Which is fantastic. So basically he goes, China, thank you, but I don't need you.
Okay, so great. And I agree with you totally. We've said all along on this show, as everybody else on the Australian media has been screaming, oh, it's a trade war, it's going to end in doom and gloom. We've kept repeating, as you said, the art of the deal, it's tactical ploys to get the best way for the American economy. And the better the American economy does, the better we do. Now, talk to us about Donald Trump's achievements, this impetuous, reckless character. Tell us his achievements. You've written, also, Alfredo writes for publications like The Hill. You've been on Hannity, Fox News, or, you know, Wall Street Journal, US Today. Alfredo, you know your stuff. You know it very, very well. So tell us about Donald Trump's achievements from your point of view.
Well, I'm sure even out here, you have all heard of, you know, infamous Nancy Pelosi.
Yes.
And the term that she used about
there you are on
Armageddon.
screen. Sorry, we'll just have a look. There you are on the right-hand side of the screen with Donald. So great shot there.
Feeling the energy.
Oh yeah. No, it was. In fact, that was just before the all the votes were happening on the tax cuts. So we pushed that fight, by the way, right up to the end.
Well done.
And in fact, by the way,
we need you here to push tax cuts.
I'll tell you, many folks told me point blank that were in the know, that were actually part of that legislation, right? And says, unfortunately, we love you, but the small business component is never going to make it in.
Yeah.
And it did make it in.
And you did make it.
Right?
Well done. So pay attention, Australian small business people. We need an Alfredo here.
One of the not often discussed, but I understand very powerful decisions that was included in that bill was the accelerated depreciation.
Huge.
Just explain to our audience what that technical term, what does it mean and what effect did it have?
Well, again, if you missed that, it was huge.
Huge. Ross is a bit slow on the uptake often, Alfredo.
I know, that's all right.
Don't worry.
That's all right, we got it.
Yeah.
No, but it really was one of the most important things within the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that had immediate impact. No longer that depreciation schedule that people had to worry about 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, whatever. It was immediate expensing of capital investment back into your business, which is why you see business investment is up 8.4%.
So tell us these achievements. Come on, take us through all the stats.
Right, so overall, again, and I referred, Nancy Pelosi said this was going to be Armageddon, and I say if 4.2% GDP growth is Armageddon, if 3.9% unemployment rate, record lows amongst Hispanics, blacks, Asians, women, if that describes Armageddon, I tell people, bring it on every day because it feels really, really good. And we see that, right? We're also seeing, of course, the record achievement on the stock market, almost up 40% during his election. And why is that important? People are like, oh, well, there you go. The fat cats are doing better. No, these are grandmas, grandpas that have pensions, that have IRAs, school teachers, 401ks. I mean, this is part of their financial security. And so that's a really positive thing. We're seeing, again, construction and mining jobs that, frankly, the previous administration under Barack Obama said, those jobs will never come back in the United States.
Don't you remember, Alfredo, Obama saying, oh, he thinks he can change, he can do things better. Oh, is there a plan? Kind of snidely going as if Donald Trump knows what he's doing. And
that's right.
We're seeing everything laid out as he predicted.
Well, and I'm sure you guys saw on Thursday that the Democrats finally rolled him back out. Right, brought him out in a speech in Illinois, and he was taking credit. He was taking a bow for the economy. People have told me, well, Alfredo, you can't deny that this is the Obama effect. And I go, you know what? You're actually absolutely correct. It is the Obama effect. It's the effect of him being out of office is what we're seeing. And so we're excited about this.
Yeah, there is a new spirit of optimism taking place in Australia, I would think, as a consequence of the same effect.
Absolutely. We are seeing that now, Alfredo. You mentioned earlier when we were chatting that you're loving Australia. So from the American point of view, the kid from the tailor shop, the Mexican immigrant tailor shop, you know, through the White House, now you're taking a bus from Brizzy down to Sydney to rev up. People went along to his bus and rev up small business people. What do you make of Australia?
Well, first of all, it must be one of the most optimistic countries I've ever seen overall because it's all good.
Good.
Every time I talk to somebody, it's all good, right? But truly, it is optimistic. I see that. But we also, I think, what I've seen a little bit is some people are feeling like they're starting to give up. I think especially on the Liberals because they're thinking, we've lost the battles, we've lost the fight, Labor's taking over. Frankly, what I say is, one, you need small business owners to speak out more. Which I would kindly challenge them to come out and do stuff. In the words of John F. Kennedy, ask not what you can do, what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country.
Absolutely.
And I think that applies here. And also business owners, business leaders, CEOs, they need to step out. I think they're being intimidated a lot by the labor movement about the fear of boycotts. You got to do what's right, and the right thing here is to make sure you have a growing economy because that's going to float all boats.
Can I say when you talk about speaking out in the business community, I would say we have a sort of a macro corporatist body called the Business Council of Australia.
Right.
Okay. And at the time where a group of Liberal members of Parliament were challenging the so-called National Energy Guarantee, which was basically just a new big wet blanket of tax compliance and regulatory burden, the Business Council was campaigning for more tax, for more burden. And so I think often the small business community looks at it and say, well, these big corporatists have just fully sold out. They're working against against us.
Right, right. Well, and that is the thing. I mean, when you look at that, the energy guarantee, what it was doing, I mean, that has to be one of the most aggressive taxes, basically, on the folks who could afford it the least.
Yes.
You know, just regular working class folks, right? Because that's going to impact the cost of energy. It's going to go up. Small business owners, where it's one of the major components, energy costs in a small business. Not many people talk about it, especially, let's say, in restaurants. It's one of the biggest components of costs, right? Got to bring those costs down. We have a great policy now, I think, under the Trump administration, which is really kind of an all of the above. Right? You look for the best possible ways. Mining, for example, is back. Coal's coming back. I mean, we got to find ways that we can do that. Nuclear, for example, I think is another good option.
Absolutely.
So we got to find that all of the above strategy. I think you guys probably have that same situation here.
Well, Alfredo Ortiz, thanks so much for being on Outsiders today. I'm sure there are many small business people out there who love this show across Australia are thinking, we need someone like Alfredo on our side. Glad you're in Australia. Thanks to the IPA, to the Institute for Public Affairs for bringing Alfredo out. That's great. And if you're lucky enough to have caught his bus, when do you head back?
Head back on the 12th, but we're going to be down in your legislative body right in the heat of it Monday and Tuesday.
Fantastic.
So please come down, take the bus, you know, take a look at the bus.
Look out for Alfredo Ortiz and his Job Creators Network. We'll be back. Thank you so much, Alfredo.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a sec. We've got some lefty lunacy to remind us what the alternative to Alfredo's point of view of the world is. Lefty lunacy. Back in a tick.